Hi everyone, it's Brent and I'm back today. We're doing our design practices lab, um, available through the progress page like usual. I'm linking these labs in as I go and as I restructure them. Um, but today's going to be short lab. There's no assignment. I know you guys have a lot on your plate. It's the end of the semester. Um, Although I think this is arguably, um, aside from the security lab, I think this one is probably one of the most important. It's the design practices lab. So what is design? So we know a lot of you guys are ACT majors with the human centered concentration, which is what I graduated in 2 years ago. And in that major, you take CS 464, which is human centered computing in design, right? So there's this misconception that um, UX is really the future term for UI design. So UI is user interface, right? And it's as much as like drawing and putting things on a canvas and making stuff. So what we've been doing, really, like when you think of a website, it's all it is a UI into some set of information, right? We have some information that the user wants, um, and for like let's look at Google. Okay, so Google, right? What do? The main thing Google does is search. So if you look at this website, it's like a search bar in the middle, a little banner, and then it's mostly white space. There's not much else going on. And then if you want some other stuff, you can go down here to these footers and headers. But the main concentration of this page is search, right? Now that's a user experience decision, right? They could have put the search bar here, 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 and it would have been a UI. But this is a UI that gives us access to Google's searching interface, right? Um, so really, when people develop professional websites, like these big companies that come up with their websites, there's a lot of testing and decision making that goes in to how it is designed. So let's go to, oh, I don't want to show everyone my Instagram, so that's going to be Akko. There you go. You can see my Instagram account, but let's just look at it. Okay, so here we can see the way that they designed this. They spent like so much money and so much time trying to design this just so, for example, up here, this spacing, or having the profile here, having the settings thing, right? So the thing is they hire these user experience designers and they come up with thousands of possible designs, and then they take those to users and they test how long it takes people to take certain actions, how people feel about the interface, um, what things does it prioritize, what actions are they more likely to take. There's so much that goes into this design of the user experience, and really that's so much more beyond what the UI just is. So that I linked this video down here because I think this guy explains it better than I can. But basically the idea is that when your user uses your website or your web application, right? So we're developing applications for our milestones. Um, you need to be thoughtful about the way that they're going to use the website, right? So the first thing is user experience really goes beyond just is it a good website or a bad website design, right? Because that's not very empirical. So we talk about the emotional experience, which seems like, okay, how is that more scientific? But if you think about it, right? Okay, are users going to be frustrated when they're done using this app because they couldn't figure out how to do the one thing they wanted to do? And I think we've all had that experience, right? Like you're using an application and you're like, all I want to do is copy and paste, or all I want to do is like an Excel, right? Like all I want to do is unhide these rows, but it's like so hard to do for no apparent reason, right? And it leaves you frustrated, and then you're like, I don't even want to use this application because it's so complicated and it's so hard to use that it's like I can't even do the thing I want to do, and you leave feeling frustrated and confused, right? Or is your application designed in such a way that when the user um, when the user uses it, right, like they've had a long day, we all work hard and do a lot of stuff, right? And we use an app that maybe on Instagram, or we're using a tool or something, and it's so easy to use. I think we've had this experience before too, right? Or we're shopping online. It's so easy to do. It's almost like it happens for us. It just flows naturally the way that we expect it to, right? And as a result, we're satisfied with the experience because, you know, like it's not slowing us down from our expectation of how we should be able to work, right? We're able to work through it. Um, so you have to consider these things, right? But how do you how do you know if they're going to be frustrated, right? Because when we're building it, oh, it seems simple. Click here. We added the functionality. We spent hours designing this, right? Um, but you really have to think about the user. Who is using your application, right? What is your audience? It's just like if you're writing a paper, right? Who's reading your paper? That's who you're going to be writing to, right? Or if you're giving a speech, who's listening to your speech, right? If I give a speech to third graders, and if I give a speech to college students, or if I'm teaching a lab to third graders, if I'm teaching a lab to you guys, those are entirely different audiences. I'm going to use different words, different analogies, different metaphors. Everything is different. And so your audience is the key. How are they working? How are they using your app, right? So you have to think about, how does my app meet their workflow? And what a workflow is right, let's say, let's come up with a common, what is like a common workflow? Let's say like the grocery shopping. Like let's say, okay, so you're going grocery shopping. I know this is kind of a trigger for all of us right now because of the quarantine, but right, what is the workflow? Like the first thing you do is you arrive at the store, right? You get a cart, and then you usually, you go around the grocery store in a certain order, right? Depending on, you know, the way things are set up, right? And maybe I'm always like, I always get my produce first, and then I do this, and then I do that. But everyone's different, right? But you go up and down the aisles. You have certain workflows, right? You normally expect to get your cart before you get the items in the store, right? How confusing would it be if you went into the grocery store, you had to grab all your items and carry them in your arms, and then you didn't get your cart till you were halfway through the store, and then you dropped it off, and then your cart, and then you're off and going, or things have to happen in a certain order, and there's certain expectations you have about the way that you're going to do things, right? And so that's why it's important, is like the grocery store example is contrived, but there's a lot of work that people do out in the world that they use software to achieve their job. But us as software developers might not fully understand what their job is or how to do it, right? So what we need to do as designers when we're building these applications is we need to go in and figure out how they do their job. What things do they do in what orders? There's techniques for doing this that some people will learn in 464, but you need to figure out the way that they work. What things do they do before other things? What are their expectations about things will happen? What are certain places where their work breaks down, where they're doing unnecessary steps that exist, right? Like maybe like, for example, this is really silly, but let's say someone's printing a paper, right? And they can't figure out how to print multiple copies. So they print one copy and then they use the copy machine to make more, right? That's a breakdown, but it's not like anyone does that. But that's just an example, right? When you see something like that, it's so obvious. You're like, oh, this is obviously unnecessary and redundant. There must be a better way to do this. And that's where you can really, um, make money as this user experience designer. Is, how do you simplify and make this workflow so easy for them, right? So in Google, right, it's like, it's so easy. It's okay, the search bar is right here, and then when I click this thing up, right, it comes up with all these things that I've searched, or if I'm going to search something, it helps complete it for me, so that I don't even have to deal with typing everything out, right? So things just happen. It feels like things are just happening for me. That's really when your experience is getting after it. So understanding users and their expectations. So I linked in 3 websites that I like. I know that you guys did Best of the Web at the beginning of the semester, but I like when doing user experience design, right? A large part of it is understanding your users, their workflow, and how they're going to use your application. Another thing is understanding the design trends that exist, and understanding, how should I say this? Understanding what people's expectations are about the way that things exist. So, for example, right, all these sites, right, how many websites do you go to that don't have a top nav bar, right? So here's Tesla, top nav, right? Look how it's, we make a lot of, wow, that's really cool. Hold on a second. I don't know what just happened, but it was really cool. This image slides. Okay. Look how this nav bar, it doesn't even have a background. So if we look at Microsoft's, it's like that too. It has no background, right? Okay. So that's weird. Apple's has a background, right? But it's very low cognitive load, right? It's just this white on black. It's very soothing and easy to operate with, right? But all these nav bars, look, it's centered. Apple's main information is centered. This one isn't quite centered. It's off to the left. But Tesla's is centered as well. And then you can see auxiliary information often to the right. Up here in Microsoft, you have your stuff to the right. Here's your search, right? Look where the search bar is in Apple, on the top right as well. Tesla doesn't have a search, right? But they have shop up here. Now, if you look at Microsoft, there's your cart. Apple, this is a shop. It's a shopping bag, right, for shopping. So there's a certain way that things exist, right? If you look at the sign-in option, right, top right, Microsoft, top right. If you do Facebook, right, mine's just going to go straight to my Facebook. But if I were logged out, right, look where the sign-in is, right? So the point I'm trying to make is that if you build your website and you put the sign in down in the bottom left or somewhere over here or somewhere over here, your user isn't fully going to understand and register right away what they're supposed to be doing. And for us, right, it seems obvious, right, because you've seen it a million times, right? Every time you use a website where you sign in, you know where the sign in is. But the idea is that there's might be some other features that you're implementing where you go, I don't really know where the best place to put this is, or I don't know how to style this. Go out and look at other websites that do something similar, right? And look at websites that you find pleasing aesthetically, websites that you feel like are easy to use, and suck up that information, right? It's like really what's weird about design is it's kind of an art form, and like most types of art, there's a lot of, I don't want to say copycat because I don't think there's a lot of rearranging and taking ideas and adding them together, right? So like in music, right? They go out and they take ideas from other artists, from their influences, right? These guys are my influences, right? So if you're a guitar fan, right, John Mayer is like, oh, Jimi Hendrix is an influence of mine, or you know, this guy's an influence of mine, and so I have this playing style where I do this, right? Or an EDM artist might be like, this person is my influence, and so you can notice there's some parallels or there's some kind of ancestry that goes along with that where they pull in ideas from all these other artists, and as a result they have their own form of art. So this is what it is with your website: is take ideas from other websites, right? Say, I like that, I don't like that, I like this but I don't like that, right? Take those ideas and put them into your website. And that's why I say it's okay to follow the trends. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. What you do is you take good ideas and you combine them to make your own ideas, right? That's where you really, really can get stuff going, because then your users' expectations are still met. The sign-in thing is still in the top right. There's maybe the nav bar is still on the top, but maybe you redefine the way that you do the background. Maybe you redefine the way that you show that you have one of these items highlighted. All these things are decisions that have to be made, right? Another thing I think is interesting that you should note, this is a psychology principle, but look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So look at that. So this is called the rule of sevens. So in psychology, there's this principle called short-term memory, right? Or working memory, which is the things that you can hold in your brain while you're doing stuff, right? So we have long-term memory, like remembering, your high school graduation, or remembering what you had for breakfast, like yesterday or something, or remembering a nice dinner you went out on, or remembering an important moment in your life that happened however many years ago or months ago, right? But we also have something called short-term or working memory, and this isn't like, oh, something from 5 minutes ago, but it's like when you're doing a mental math problem, right? The things that you're holding in your head, like, or when you're solving a puzzle, remembering, like, oh yeah, I have all these pieces that I'm going to be putting in. It's this memory that it's like the RAM of your brain, right? So your brain's RAM, okay? So the thing is the rule of seven states that you can only really have 7 at most succinct pieces of information in your brain. It's really like 7 plus or minus 2. Some people can only really do 5, some can do 9. And this can actually have an effect on people's intelligence, right? How much they can do in their working memory is really helpful. And oftentimes as we get older, this declines. But the rule of sevens is that you should try not to exceed 7, right? So yes, you could say these things are, if you were to count all of them across, you'd say it's greater than 7, but really because these are grouped together and these are grouped together, they're two separate things, right? Same thing here is kind of like, it's hard to say, right, because these are continuous, but you can still kind of tell subtly that these, since they're icons and not words, that they're different than these, right? Um, Same thing here. So what they do in these nav bars is they rarely exceed 7 items, right? Here, they use proximity to redefine this, proximity, right? So the point I'm trying to make is there's all these little tricks, and you're obviously not going to be able to learn all of them in this lab, but the idea is that you get a little bit of a taste of what's happening and how intentional these designs are in order to make it easier for you to use it, or in order to enhance your experience, in order to make it um, again, seem effortless, right? That's my favorite thing is it seems like things are happening for you. That's when you know your design is good, right? And it's hard when you're designing it, but when someone else is using it, that's when you really know. Another set of design principles, I can't go over everyone, but I think these are the most important, right? So we talked about rule of sevens. Gestalt principles, which is another psychological principle, has to do with the way that we visually perceive and group things. I linked this article in because I think this is a great example. There's all these Gestalt principles, negative space, right? So here's the FedEx logo. And you can see there's an arrow here. And it's not distinctly an arrow, but the shape between the E and the X causes you to see this arrow, right? And that's called the Gestalt principle of negative space, right? This Gestalt principle of similarities will group similar things together, right? So these green squares go together, and these gray squares go together. Well, there's no reason they should, but our brain ties those things together. So if you look at this apple side, right, icons go together, words go together, right? What's another example here? This one uses a lot of proximity, so we'll talk about proximity, hopefully in a second. Continuation, okay, here's another good one. So the idea that really like this is one line, right? We don't see it as this red thing that then forks, right? We see it as red changing to gray, right? And we don't see this one as forking down. We see this one as continuing straight. So that's the idea that our brain wants to cause continuation of lines, right? Or closure. The idea that we're going to close. So this panda image, right? We're closing this to create an outline in our mind. We see essentially what is the outline, even though this is just white on white, right? But there's closure because we continue these lines through. Proximity, this is, I think, one of the arguably most important for your designing. Things that are close together, we group together, right? So here's if everything's equidistant, and here's if they're grouped in columns. So look at Tesla, right? Okay, these buttons, the order in existing inventory, they go together. This header stuff goes together. This stuff's grouped together. It goes together. These things are together because they're close to each other. These things are together because they're close to each other. Look at Microsoft. These things must be together. They're close to each other. These are close to each other. They're together. These things are together, right? Because they're grouped and they're similar. So you can see how often this principle is used, right? Oh, I love this. Here's an example of a USPS form and how proximity just screws with your brain. So look, this primary business name / trade name is supposed to go with this field C, but because it's closer to D, it just makes it look horrible and hard to right? It just doesn't make sense. It's weird, but the government is notoriously bad at this because they just don't care. But see how the proximity makes these two things look like they're together instead of making C look like it's together with primary business name, right? Figure ground is the concept that an image can both have a figure right here and a ground, which is this tree, or it's very hard to reverse this in your brain and see the tree and then see the white as the background, but you might be able to. So this is one of those trippy illusion images, right? Or here's a good one. Okay, so here's a wolf, but then really, if you see this as the background, the white as the background, then you'll see the wolf really. But if you see this white as the foreground, then you'll see the wolf as the background, right? So there's all these art principles, right? Here's another one. This is a classic we all know. Symmetry. Symmetry is really important. And I mean, like, you can read this on your own. Common fate, UX design. So all these principles are psychological principles of, if you're an artist or you like to draw, I'm sure you've seen these things before. right? If you're a photographer, you know this is a very common one, rule of thirds. If you have a grid, right, you try and take up a third of the grid. Intersection, 0 point of interest. Um, I don't know how to really talk through every one of these things. Visual hierarchies. Let's look at the CSU homepage. I want to point out another thing. Notice how every web page has a huge banner. Um, huge banner, huge banner, huge banner, huge banner. And then here's another one. See how the common design floats towards one page where these different blocks and you scroll down like a Microsoft one page style, right? It has these kind of block like items. Same thing with Apple. Tesla is, I mean, the biggest example of this, I feel like. But see, just notice these principles, right? This is a trend now. Most websites are going to be doing this. If they have lots of information, it's less cognitive load for the user to scroll down, right? Like think about how we read, right? We read left to right, top to bottom. So we're just scrolling and continuing to read instead of having to click up here to go to the next thing, right? So it's kind of a natural motion, and it's really easy to scroll on your phone and on your computer, right? Whereas it might be more difficult to click between. So I think it's important for you all to explore design, but really, really look at, I think most importantly, look at the existing trends. Look at how things are done, and then think of ways that you can incorporate that into your own websites, right? Think of the way that white space is used, right? Look at all this white space on Instagram, right? There's so much going on, and I think if you all have the time and you're bored, and you have Netflix, there is a documentary, I think called Design Something, and it is very good. There's a design documentary on UX, and it's about the dude who designed Instagram, and I think you all would really get a lot out of it, especially if you're HACT majors. It's really interesting, and I think this is honestly one of my favorite parts about computer science because of the art involved. Right? It borders on graphic design, but the difference between us and graphic designers is that we're not just designing things to look pretty. We're also designing things to flow with their work. Does that make sense? So really, UI is the pretty stuff, but experience is the workflow and how we incorporate the UI into the workflow and how we, how fast does it need to be? How responsive does it need to be? What do they get out of it when they're doing this or that? So this lab, I think, I'm glad it's just a short lab, and I know it's a lot of me talking, but I hope that at least you get something out of it by being able to understand and notice some of these principles that are used. And if you really start paying attention and you read one of these Gestalt articles and you start looking at websites, you will notice these things are all over the place. And when you're not paying attention, like again, I said, things just seem to happen for you. It just seems natural. And so that's really the most important thing is how do you communicate the information you're trying to communicate in a way that is the most natural to the user and in a way that lowers the cognitive load on them. They don't have to think so much. They just kind of do because it just meets their expectations. So I appreciate you all for coming and listening to this lab. I know you guys are super busy. I hope that things are going well with your milestones. I know the last one was pretty hectic. And if you haven't seen my Piazza post, please make sure that you have it hosted on your URLs so I can grade it, because otherwise I have no idea who's in your team. I have no idea who hosted the web page, and so it's going to take me a really long time to grade things. So if you can go ahead and have it hosted on all your pages, just copy the files over, however you do it, then I can grade your things much quicker, and then you'll have feedback for Milestone too. So I would really appreciate that. So thank you all very much. I hope that you're doing okay, and I will have another lab out about accessibility later this week.